Director of the London Book Fair, and on behalf of all we bookfarers, a warm welcome to the Ixxus Tech Tuesday. Ixxus is, of course, a leading player in the facilitation of getting content across a multiplicity of platforms, flexibly, agilely, and most importantly, in a way that is end-user centric, and for those publishers here, most importantly, revenue generating. So here we are on the eve of one of the biggest education shows in the world, all gathered to debate the whys and the wherefores of the biggest trending topic, adaptive or personalised learning. We're going to scrutinise relationships, publishers and edtech, a match made in heaven, or an unfinished experiment. As a tech evening, we are bound to look at how tech companies and publishers are working together to deliver the Holy Grail, an improvement in personalised learning in the 21st century with enabling technology. So who is our panel of experts? Just look on the sofa while I just turn the page a moment. It's taking some time. Right. Firstly, Bob Harrison. Hooray, thank you, Bob. Whose CV makes daunting reading, let me assure you. After a long career at the teaching coalface, or silicon face, I think you wanted to rename it, Bob has been Toshiba's education advisor for 14 years and is a writer, presenter and researcher on mobile learning, digital technologies and next generation learning. He is a member of the Ministerial Educational Technology Action Group, a snappy name, and is also chair of the Teaching Schools New Technology Advisory Board, which aims to ensure that the next generation of teachers have the necessary skills to prepare children for work in digital life in the third millennium. We'll hear more of that later. Next to Bob is Dawn Hallibone, currently Deputy Head at Oakdale Junior School, where she leads on computing. Not only does Dawn believe in the power of children in disseminating digital skills, she also believes that digital tools can both engage and enhance the curriculum for all learners. Dawn is also a member of that snappily named Ministerial Educational Technology Action Group. Well done, Dawn. Right, a moment, there we go. Moving along our sofa, Carl Robinson is the Senior Publishing Consultant at Ixxus. He has been in educational publishing for over 20 years, with Pearson Education, Macmillan Education and Oxford University Press being on his CV. Using his publishing and digital experience at these companies, Carl has, for the last 6 years, taken a great interest in digital learning and changing processes and systems to support publishing content for this digital age. He is keen to see a move from print-driven to content-driven models, which he firmly believes will liberate the development of new products, product types and business models. Carl is also the author of Thinking Outside the Books, an acclaimed white paper on reinventing educational publishing for the digital age. And to round off our impressive panel is, appropriately for a London Book Fair event, a publisher. Helen Cunningham is the Publishing Director for the highly respected UK Education Division at Cambridge University Press, a publishing house with some considerable years of history.
The world's oldest publisher.
The world's oldest publisher, Helen tells me. I fear that Helen herself has only 15 years experience in digital and print educational publishing, during which time she has driven strategies for a number of different markets, including the Caribbean and Africa, as well, of course, as the UK. But I must declare my own sense of being overwhelmed by the expertise sitting alongside me. As a self-declared but very interested layperson within the educational publishing world, I'm greatly looking forward to diving straight into hearing from Bob about EdTech. Is a marriage or divorce on the cards?
I'm really pleased you said that about marriage and divorce, because I ought to say before we go any further, even though I now work with Toshiba. Can you hear me okay back there? Okay. And see me as well? The people in the cheap shit seats at the back there. Having lived with teachers, trained with teachers, worked with teachers, married a teacher, got divorced by a teacher, remarried a teacher, and my kids are teachers. And I understand teachers are a bit like publishers. One of the things that I've learned is you can do an awful lot with teachers and not very much to them. So, I'm going to start off and I'm going to share my grandchildren with you, if that's okay. My grandchildren, Tommy, Millie, Bella and Hudson, and another one on the way, leave school in 2027, 2028, 2030 and 2031. and Millie is the eldest. She's 8, goes to Abbey School in Nottingham. And she came home from school the other day, and she was really excited because she's going on her very first away day with an overnight stay. And they're going to the Peak District. Now, how many of you have been to the Peak District? Have you ever been to Castleton in Derbyshire? Okay, she's really excited because she's going to Castleton in Derbyshire. And I don't know about you, but every time I've gone there, it's been pissing down with rain. It's been dark, it's been wet, and all you do is go into caves. I think they'd rather oversold the prospect to Millie, but nevertheless she's excited. But in the spirit of doing things with you rather than to you, I'm going to ask you to do something now. So Millie's mum rang me about 2 weeks ago. Millie's really excited. She's come home and she's got the list of things that she's allowed to take. Sleeping bag, yes. Toilet bag, yes. Pyjamas, yes. Torch, yes. If Millie wants to take photographs, she's allowed to take one disposable camera. So, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and one of you's got to be Millie, and one of you's got to be Millie's mum. Would you like to just do that? So, put your hand up if you're Millie. Put your hand up if you're Millie. Put your hand up if you're Millie's mum. Put your hand up if you're Millie's mum. Right, Millie, turn to your mum, and ask her to tell you exactly what is a disposable camera. Off you go. Have you got to the bit where you click it on yet? Have you clicked it on? Who's got to the chemist? Who's got to the chemist? Got to the chemist? Is it in the bin yet? Who's thrown it in the bin? Okay? Right. Yeah, it's in the bin. Now then, Millie then says, what happens if I want some of these photographs to share with my friends? Well, you have to go back to the chemist. Why? Why would you? Well, because we have to have some more developed. So, Millie's mum, please explain to Millie what we mean by the term developed. Go ahead. Okay, that's enough. Alright. Have I made my point? Okay, so this is my point. And I'm going to sit down now, Jack, so you can relax. This is my point. Our education system was designed in the post-industrial era. It was designed and predicated on mechanisation, production and Taylorism. It's not fit for purpose to prepare our young and older learners for the new digital, global, competitive economy. That's why I'm not the education minister. When Tommy and Millie and Bella leave school, be careful, you might feel a bit queasy when I get to this point. Are you ready? Publishers, they will leave school with no books, no pens, no paper, no pencils, no desks, no interactive whiteboards. That's why I never get invited to Smart and Promethean. No printers unless they're 3D printers. They will have books, but the books essentially are going to be on a range of devices not dissimilar from that. They'll be used to touch screen, on-screen, gesture-based computing that's intelligent, can take their voice and convert it to text and their text and convert it to voice. They'll be used to learning analytics where they'll be able to ask questions and get immediate feedback. They'll be algorithm-based. The question is, will you have a company to be able to support Tommy Millie and Bella in their future learning. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Another teacher. So I'm currently deputy head. I started teaching 20 years ago. So when I started teaching, the technology I had in my classroom was a BBC computer, which I could barely use, to be honest. We now have laptops, iPads, interactive whiteboards, which we've just got rid of because technology moves on at a pace. And 5 years ago, we actually worked with Cambridge on a programme called Race to Learn that actually picked up the primary digital content of that 5 years ago. But have we actually moved on in those 5 years? One of the terms is adaptive technology. Now, Time magazine, 18 months ago, published an article, and they called adaptive learning the learning revolution. 18 months ago, we're here. So it's more a slow sense of revolution, more than an overthrowing of perhaps the status quo. Now we know that publishing companies, and we know this as a school, such as Macmillan Pearson, have invested heavily in edtech startups. We're quite aware of that as teachers. And in January, Discovery this month announced that they were moving into edtech. Amplify are a large organisation in the US, personalised learning. So what does that actually mean for me as a teacher and the children at my school? So I teach in a large junior school in East London. We've got 350 kids at school. Technology for me is another tool in my teaching toolbox. But budgets are tight. Your budgets are tight, my budget is tight. And for May, I have the guessing that educational budgets are going to be even tighter. So we don't want to pay for technology just to merely replicate the resources we already have, because what is the point of that? Or producing what's been called chocolate-covered broccoli, which, if you don't know, is kind of games that will seem really exciting to the digital native generation that will get them learning. Or as the kids just look at it and go, no, thanks miss. So we already use online software that will tell us how our children are responding to various tasks and what they need to do to further improve. The problem is that these are very often free and are open source, and I can access them using social media. So I could go on Twitter on a Sunday night and say, teaching this, what do you recommend, what should I be using? It may not be one of the texts that you publish. It will be more likely an open source free resource that has been sourced by teachers using technology. The other question is the privacy of data. If we're having all this data out there, parents are always concerned, and we as a school need to protect that data. What do you as publishers do with their data? What happens to that data when the child leaves my school? Do you keep their data? What do you use it for? That's a question that I think you need to maybe question with parents, and it's a question that we get asked all the time with parents. We can still not publish certain pictures of children online or videos. So when you start talking about their personal data, we've entered another realm. We're also a multi-device society, which sounds quite nice actually. If we all looked around the room, we probably would have all different devices. So how does that tie up? The devices I use in school may be different from the devices that they have at home. If you're publishing for the device, are you publishing for all of them? Are you publishing for me as a teacher in my school? Are you publishing for the child, or are you publishing for the parent? It needs to happen everywhere. Learning happens anytime, anywhere. I like to describe it as a bit like Martini, if you're old enough to remember the advert, which I'm glad that a couple in the room are, because it doesn't really age me. We need to keep pace with this at all, completely. But the problem is that schools may not see it as a priority. Schools and leadership teams are up against league tables, and what we're measured on is our exams, which is another question to throw into the mix, is if we're measured on our exams and schools have that priority, are schools going to invest in the digital technology that you are looking to produce? We also need to keep up with the changes. As I mentioned, budgets a bit tight. But also teachers. Teacher training needs to keep a pace, because if the teachers are to deliver the content, they need to be trained in how to deliver it, as well as the children being able to access it. So for me, I think that technology definitely has the potential to transform learning, but I think we're all in the room, we're still learning, and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Well, Dawn and Bob are both on the teaching side, and Helen and I have been discussing whether we stand up or not. So we're going to sit because we spend most of our time in meetings, and this is our usual posture. So, I mean, faced with that, those two statements, really, it's very difficult for publishers to consider. Well, how do we go forward? And I thought about my background has been mostly in publishing and more recently involved in technology, and I was thinking about the idea, is this really a match made in heaven? What was the other part? Match made in heaven or an unfinished experiment? And so I thought the easy answer is really, is it a match made in heaven? Well, no. Is it an experiment? Possibly, probably, I don't know, maybe. And I started thinking along those lines, well, why is it a match made in heaven from a publisher education point of view? And I think we were chatting about this earlier on, and Bob used the term mindset, I'd use skill set, mindset, that kind of thing. Inside a publishing company, in my experience, we're not seeing the new skill sets that come along. So typically, an approach to an educational learning product is to say, we're really, really good at educational books. Let's see if we can shove a book into a digital format, and that'll probably work because the learning is inherent in the content. I would argue that's probably not the case. The other side of it is, I think, about products as well. So publishers push out products. Typically, again, educational publishing has pushed out a book at the other end of the cycle, and then that's gone off to a distributor. The distributor sells it through to the institution or the end user, and the publisher, at some point in the future, will probably put together a reprint of that and then shove it out and then forget about it again. Digital products, digital learning products, very much like any other software company, needs to have its own support cycle, its IT support, iterative development, beta testing, getting data analytics coming back in, all that kind of stuff. The typical publisher that I've been part of in the past has not had that skill set as a natural source. They don't hire from that base. And so I think hiring needs to change if it's going to become a match. So in terms of the experiment side of things, I said I think it is an experiment. I think it's a series of experiments. There's experimentation going on both internally and how you get these things done. I know of a couple of publishers that we at Ixxus are working with who are trying new ways of doing publishing, new teams around the way that they push things out the door, where perhaps, shock horror, the editor might not be the person who's the ultimate product owner, but actually there might be a project manager who's helping them deliver something. And that has given them some interesting learning to take away and to think about how they might do things differently. They've hit walls about their content. They want, a lot of digital learning needs to have a lot more content. Particularly, one of the things we were trying to shy away from a bit was adaptive learning. And I think it's really interesting that adaptive learning, as far as I understand it, is pretty good when there's a binary algorithm, in the sense that there's a yes/no answer, maths for example, and then it can assess whether you got that right and give you some remedial learning and so on. When you get into the more or the less binary subjects, such as my background is English language teaching, well, what's a right or wrong answer when you get to a grammatical nuance of a sentence, and how does the algorithm work with that? That means the publisher has to develop loads more content, and typically they're doing that rather than looking at their content that they've already got and seeing if they can mine it and use it in a different way. So that's an experiment there. How do we do things differently with content? How do we have different teams around it? What's the different mindset that needs to go on around it? And in my background, again, is very much in international publishing, so looking at then different markets, different places in technological maturity, different infrastructures and so on. So an ELT publisher might have, in any one day, to deal with a market that is totally 100% print, right the way through to the other end where they're 100% digital. They're having to react very fast to ministers of education turning around, as I'm sure happens in the UK an awful lot, and saying, oh, we're going to do things slightly differently next year, I hope that's okay with you. And teachers, on one hand, are saying, oh my goodness, we're going to have to learn a new way of doing things, or new technology, all that kind of stuff. But publishers are sitting in their offices thinking, God, how are we going to turn this around now? We've invested so much in our print publishing for this particular market, and now suddenly it's going to go digital. My own experience a few years back with the United Arab Emirates, where the Sheikh decided that all higher education institutions were going to be iPad, not tablet, but iPad only from September, and he announced this in April. And most of the ELT publishers are thinking, gosh, we've got an awful lot of money riding on this, and we're going to have to deliver something in less than 6 months. How are we going to do that? So that's the impact, I think, on publishers with EdTech. Helen may agree or disagree in a minute, you'll find out. And then the final couple of things, I do think EdTech offers an opportunity for publishers, and seizing that opportunity is really key. And that's where the experimentation, that's why I think it probably is an experiment. There are going to be some failures, you need to kind of fail forward, I think is the latest buzzword I read somewhere. So let's make a few mistakes, but let's make sure that we're moving forward as we're going forward, as we go on. And learning from that and then channeling that back in. I think publishers in, do you say 2027? I agree with you. I think the publisher will be a very, very different animal in that time. If they're not, they won't be around. It'll be a bit like Kodak and other companies. I guess it is an experiment. That's my answer to the question. And I think we're on a journey to becoming a match made in heaven, and on the road to where nirvana, where you've got content and enrichment and the ability to reuse and recombine and redeliver and deliver to multiple platforms and platform agnosticity, if that's even a word. That's the nirvana, and that's where you've got to be heading.
That's a nice link from Carl. I also spend most of my time in meetings, so I'm going to sit down. From my point of view, it's still an unfinished experiment. By the very nature of education and technology and publishing, I think that experimental state will continue, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I get a little bit tired of publishers sort of waiting for a moment where they can freeze time and say this is it. And actually I think while it's experimental, it means we have to think on our feet and be more innovative. So I personally welcome that. Rates of implementation of technology, we all know, vary enormously due to lots of factors, including curricula, assessment, as we've spoken about, access to technology and budget. And those variables make educational publishing a really challenging but exciting place to be. Gone are the days, which I think is a good thing, where a publisher publishes a print book, puts it out, forgets about it until reprint or reedition. Ideally, the tech publishing solution needs to be sufficiently open for the future repurposing of content, further integration or reuse in an alternate context, and also in terms of iteration. Now that poses some problems, because however enthusiastic I am as a publishing director, when I go to my finance director, the upfront investment and the ongoing costs that publishers face now are very different from working on a per project basis with a budget. Additionally, the proliferation of free materials, and I think there's a general lack of confidence and knowledge about where the value is in the value chain, makes pricing very complicated. So where we knew how much a book cost to make and we could add a margin and put a sales price, with digital that's thrown out the window. But it's also very challenging, and I know, having spoken to Dawn, I know this as well, it's very challenging to meet as a publisher. Some schools are completely digitally set up, some are not at all set up, and most are somewhere in between. And we also, I think as publishers, it's important to say we understand that digital doesn't replace a teacher. We understand that, and we need to work with teachers and students particularly. We were having a pre-conversation about this, how educational publishers traditionally have worked with teachers and asked them a lot of questions, but how often have they worked with students? And I'm personally trying to do that a lot at the moment. I think all of those variables put us in a difficult place. It means that we need to offer a blended mix of print and digital. And I think that's the case across the board. And even with companies like Pearson, who have perhaps been the most aggressive with tech, would say the same, that they're still doing stuff in print and they're still taking into account the teacher. So I suppose what I think is it's definitely not a doom and gloom situation for publishers. And I also get tired when publishers want to freeze time and say that it is a doom and gloom time for publishers. It really isn't. There are huge opportunities with EdTech. That might include personalised learning, it might include multifaceted learning for a generation which, whether we like it or not, consume media in a very different way from how we did when we grew up. And I think that with good access to data, we can hone as publishers what we create and make it as useful as possible. And we can iterate content and really engage with our users, which we mustn't forget about. The trick really to all of this, the holy grail I think, is understanding the value chain. as a publisher, is that in the curation of content? Is it data? Is it the reporting? Is it through vision? Is it assessment? And I don't think any of us are sure yet. But I read a quote recently from Madeline Hunter who said, any growth requires a temporary loss of security. And I think that's where we are. And lots of people who went to publishing don't like that. I personally don't mind it, but I think that it doesn't necessarily go with the culture of publishing. But it means that we are forced to experiment now, and we will be into the future. I think if we were having this debate in 5 years' time, a lot of the same questions would arise. Education and technology won't stop changing, and nor will the publisher. But as we experiment, we can generate, refine, and we can refine that our output, but also our input, crucially, and increasingly understand our users. And I'd just like to finish, I guess, by saying that, as Jack said, I work for the oldest publisher in the world, but this week alone, we signed a collaboration deal in my team with Edmodo. We have launched a digital anthology with AQA, and we've just launched a website with Zondel, the gaming company. So the idea that we are sort of sitting there and printing just print would be completely wrong. But fascinating time to be in the industry.
So a fascinating time to be in the industry, a challenging time to be in education, an exhilarating but probably frustrating time to be in technology. Can education and learning technology keep up with everything that is available and needed at the moment? Do we have the budgets? Do we have the skill set? Do we have the resources? Bob, why don't you give us your start of a 10?
Okay. Can it keep up? Well, I think it can't afford not to keep up because the kids are already kept up. And what I see emerging is a divide between what happens in kids and older people. I mean, my mum was 86. Sadly, she passed away in the summer and had spent the last 2 years housebound. And I'd like to tell you that the last 2 years of her life, when we took her car off her, she lived through a wonderful Toshiba Android tablet that we gave her, but it wasn't, it was a bleeding iPad, wasn't it? She never knew she had a wireless network, and you know, when I pushed her into the hospice, we were saying goodbye, and the nice people treated her there. She knew why she was going, and they said at the end of the induction, right, have you got any questions, Doreen? And she said, yes, what's the Wi-Fi password, please? So I think it's not just about young people, this is about older people as well, and I think education has to catch up. The reason it hasn't been able to catch up is a very incestuous inward looking, and there's a gap emerging between the reality of most people's lives and what happens in schools and colleges, and we need to address that. I just want to say something about, you've used the C word a lot, content. I have to say, I think the big challenge for you is to move away from content and to think about how technology can help you with co-creation, co-design, creativity, communication, collaboration. And interestingly, yesterday we were at an event where the guy from PISA, Andrew Schleicher, was saying in 2016, and this may affect the accountability issue, instead of just maths, English and science being tested, PISA are going to test from 2016 the ability of young people to solve problems in a digital environment. And I think that will be a game changer when it comes to accountability within our system. So the question was, is education keeping up? Answer, no. Depends where you are. If you go to Dawn School, yes. If you go to the Esther Academy in Bolton, yes. If you go to, quite a few other schools. You can, however, go to schools where it's like going back in time. And what we're hoping to hear from the Minister, for those of you going to bet on Thursday, I don't think we'll hear it from Nicky Morgan on Wednesday, but hopefully we'll hear it on Thursday, is that the government will commit to a minimum broadband entitlement for all educational institutions, which takes account of how many learners there are in the institution and the increase in demand there will be for uploading and downloading materials over the next few years. Now, that's a big ask for a Tory government going into a general election, but hopefully we'll hear that. I think if they do commit to that, and we have schools that have super fast broadband, We have a teaching workforce that's upskilled and confident and capable. We certainly have got the young and older learners who can take advantage of that.
I agree with you about collaboration and so on, but from a publisher perspective, content is the business model. So, you know, the content that we have, or content that the publishers have, is, you know, about creating that into really good learning, and then delivering that learning is what they need to do. But what I think is interesting, what I'm seeing more and more in the publishers we work with, is the bringing into a kind of continuous loop of what's going on with the consumer, and starting to really look at, I suppose the word is big data or data analytics and so on, and whatever you want to call it, it's finding another way of connecting with the end user, the person who's actually learning, and finding out what's more and more effective, and bringing that back into the publishing chain. And I think that's something we're seeing as a trend more and more, is how do we get this data out of these platforms that we're creating so that we can get them better, and so that we can make better and better content and enable collaboration. The other side, as we talked about earlier on, but I won't go into too much, is the fear from a publisher's perspective is, on two sides really, is what do you do with the content if you put it out there and it's uncontrolled, and forgive me, Helen, but you know, it's CUP content that's then taken out and reused in a different context, and possibly undermined, and the quality is challenged as a result of it. That's a challenge. The other side of it, I think I've seen a lot, is where do we as publishers, they say to themselves, stand on, do we try to lead this market? Do we try to go in and say, well, how about trying this? Do we do more experimentation? Or do we wait for the teachers and the education systems to change their minds and then we follow? And I think for a lot of publishers in recent years, I've seen much more of the kind of, I think we might have to lead, but we're a bit frightened of it.
I think that's interesting because at Cambridge University Press we launched the first entirely free product that we've ever done. Certainly at CUP there is a definite appetite to experiment, and I think we need to be, as publishers, unafraid of experimenting and seeing what works.
What about communities of practice? You could get involved in that.
Well, I put a question
For Dawn, actually, to come.
I was all ready to answer that one.
Okay, we
No,
can bring that
it's
into it as well, but I'm really interested in all of this, and sort of where does the training of teachers come into this? Because we've talked about, you know, sort of an assumption that we're teaching digital natives and children that are growing up in a digital age. But where do teachers come into that? Because 20-year-olds are going to look very old in digital terms versus 6-year-olds.
I don't believe the term digital natives actually exists. Because I have a 9-year-old at home, I have a 13-year-old at home. I also have a 43-year-old at home. You know,
You started young, didn't you?
I did actually, yes. So if we look at their relative experience and what we're expecting from each of them, neither of them have their strengths, to be fair. Love them all dearly. But we don't, and as people we don't, and we all have different skills. And I also work in initial teacher training. My degree is actually in geography, so I lecture them in geography. Now, on their PGC course, which is their postgraduate course, they get 6 hours of geography. That's in a year. Their computing and tech skills is slightly above that. So our digital natives that are coming into the classroom aren't. Now, I'm not saying that all initial teacher trainees are not skilled, of course they are. If we looked around the room now, there would be people that are more digitally competent than others, and it's the same with teachers going into any profession. It's the same with the professions that you work in your office. And we need to not have the assumption that because they're young, they can do this.
Absolutely.
And because they're young, they've been grown up with it and it's all okay. In fact, I have a teacher at school who says that she doesn't do technology. But she has a go, and two of my favourite quotes are all about failure, and I love failure. Because failure is the first attempt in learning. If you don't fail, you're not learning. And actually, if the kids in my class got everything right every day, I'd be really pissed off. Because they're not learning, they're doing it right. I'm obviously pitching my teaching at the wrong level. And it's all about failing, but failing better. And that's what we should be trying to do. And teachers learn by failing, kids learn by failing. Unfortunately, I'm probably speaking to a room full that if you fail, it costs you an awful lot of money. But also, if we fail in school, it's costing them their education. but they have to fail to learn. If I kind of got that across, I don't know whether I'm going around in circles, but that's what I kind of,
I'd really like to look at the teacher training in terms of, because I want to know where the responsibility lies. So if you're putting out digital, but if you're putting out digital products, do publishers have a responsibility to technology companies also? But you go first because of policy.
Okay. The teacher training policy has changed significantly in the last 2 or 3 years, because for those of you who are familiar with Michael Gove, you'll be familiar with the term the blob, and the blob is predominantly the people in education, in higher education, who've been training teachers who are all communists and etc. And therefore teacher training is undergoing a transformation at the moment, part of a political agenda to undermine the professionalism of teachers and reduce it to a craft rather than a profession. And so therefore what we had is, where we used to have 3 years ago 85% of teacher trainers were done in higher education institutions and then would go into schools to do teaching practice. That's how I learned, that's how you learned. Now 50% of teachers do it that way, and the other 50% are trained in schools with a little bit of input from higher education. Now, that's okay if you're being trained in Dawn's teaching school, because you're going to get exposed to digital stuff and everything like that. If you've been trained in Altrincham Girls Grammar School in the local authority where I live, where the technology is crap, because they don't have to bother, because the girls who go to Altrincham Girls Grammar School, guess what? Get really good GCSE results. Wonder why that is. You know where I'm going with this? So the teacher training system is broken at the moment because we've got this divide. And I have to say, whilst I don't accept the blob argument, you have to say that some of the higher education teacher training establishments, they're not really in touch with the sort of world that most of us have to live in most of the time. They sort of live in a bit of the past. So I think there's some massive issues with teacher training. What implication that's got for the publishing, I have absolutely no idea.
I think in terms of publishing, there are two things. If that's a requirement, there is on one level paid for CPD, teacher training, revenue stream, but there is also in terms of, I think where we are digitally means we connect much more with our users. So we recently had a plan to actually take some material, pilot that, and get teachers film talking about how they'd used it and publish case studies of that online. And I think we all know as educational publishers that teachers listen to teachers, they don't want to listen to educational publishers. So I think even if we're not making money from it, I think there's a huge opportunity to say we are actually really listening to what people want.
Smartly. Carl, do you want to...
Yes, I'm probably not going to talk about this from a technology point of view, other than to say I think that where I've worked with companies before, one person made a comment to me, said, if I need a user guide to know how to use this software, then it's failed. It needs to be that intuitive. And more, I've never read a manual on how to use an iPad or anything else. So more and more I think that products need to be immediately intuitive and very quick to learn. So I think that's something you can plug in. I did want to, just on the training thing, so do you mind if I...
No, carry on.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say on that products being intuitive thing, I think publishers' education have been guilty of maybe overcomplicating digital and making it cause more problems. And technology should solve problems, it shouldn't cause problems. And what we've been trying to do recently is really strip back, so move away from the LMS difficult login structure and do something a lot more simple. But the best people to talk to, I hate to say it, are the students, because they're the ones who understand how intuitive technology is. And recently we did a design experiment with them where we decided which design, we stripped back our textbook design to something very Apple-y, very plain, and people in the office, some of the more traditional people who'd maybe grown up with print weren't comfortable with that. We went into schools, teachers were okay, they weren't sure. Students looked at it and they were absolutely fine, they loved it. Students looked at the navigation, they worked it out within seconds. So actually the user, let's keep coming back to the user.
So I just wanted to go, I didn't know whether to bring this up or not, but there was something I read on the way to London today from what's his name, Russell Hobby.
Oh yeah.
And who was saying that the headline is "Top Head says money spent by schools on fad iPads could have funded 8,000 teachers to go on the teach training thing." And comments like, "I think we'd better be spending the money on recruiting and training great teachers and sticking them in front of old-fashioned blackboards." There's something there that feels, and too often technology is a solution in search of a problem. There's something there that feels wrong, and something. Yes, invest in more training, but invest in training on how to turn these tools into something that becomes ignored in the classroom as a thing in itself, but as a means to an end. The learning goes on in the head, and the challenge is to get rid of the shininess, so it just becomes something used in the classroom. Another tool. One thing from 1950, just to show you this is not new, from 1950, a federal teacher in the States said, "Ballpoint pens will be the ruin of education in our country. Students use these devices and then throw them away. The American virtues of thrift and frugality are being discarded. Business and banks will never allow such expensive luxuries." That's actually true. So
I've got a few more of those quotes that I use as well. As Mandy Rice Davis said, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? He's the head of the NAHT, which is a head teachers union that predominantly work in primary schools, and they would say in the build-up to the general election we need to spend more money on teachers rather than... But let me just be very, very clear, and I know, Russell, a piece of technology never taught a child anything. That's what teachers do. There is no... I work for a technology company, Toshiba, and those of you who are going to bet, how many of you are going to bet in this next week, okay? Here's a question for you. When you go around to the vendors, suppliers of goods and services, this is the question. Could you please explain to me, in less than 30 seconds, how your product or service will improve the learning of my pupils?
Right, on that note...
Could you please explain to me how... And if any of them say to you, buy my product and it will, as a causal relationship with the improvement of learning outcomes, they're telling lies. There is no evidence anywhere in the world that any piece of technology improves learning outcomes. That's what teachers do.
Thank you, Bob. But before we leave this and we open it up to the floor, I want to ask Dawn, where does the parent sit within all of this?
With both hats on, because I'm a parent and a teacher, and both my children are at stages of their education career where their education has been changed for them. So my 13-year-old will sit the IGCSE, and the teachers don't know the curriculum yet. And my son, who is in year 5, will be the first one to sit the SATs under the new primary curriculum, where I will be told where he's ranked in the country. So bless him. So at least at 11 I'll know which percentage he's already in. Obviously as a teacher I'm not going to tell him because I don't agree with it. Now as publishers, if I was at a school, you'd probably sell your textbooks, print books to me. What do we do with digital? Who owns the textbook? Do you sell it to the school? So what happens to home learning? What happens to parents supporting at home? How do we access that? Is it via a complicated login system? Or is it out there somewhere? Or do I get a copy at home to support my pupil? At school they use iPods, at home I've got Android. So is there a market where they're available on both devices completely and they seamlessly fit? Now I know I haven't answered, but the parents are the ones with the pounds in the pockets, and very often now at some schools they're being asked not only to pay for the textbooks, to pay for the device on which the school will provide the digital textbook. And what happens when they leave? Does the device that the parents bought get wiped? Do they return all copies? That's a quite short turnaround. Is that because we've moved on? Probably more questions than answers, but it's something to consider.
That's good teaching.
Yeah, it's good. Excellent. Okay, good. Thanks, Bob. And it'd be interesting to know with my parent hat on, not necessarily with my teacher hat on.
I think as publishers we're in a tricky situation because we have traditionally sold institutionally to teachers, but actually at the moment some of the things that I'm developing are designed for the student. So there are all kinds of complications in that in terms of boring things like e-commerce and actually the data protection and being able to contact students direct. And also, I think we're very conscious of leaving teachers out of the equation and going straight to students without the teacher in that. So I think that there are definitely a number of challenges. Ideally, you want a situation where a student can get the most out of published content in the class, but it can also take that home, and where there could be link up between parent, student and teacher. But technically, it's not easy.
And there's a good segue into, just to pick up, Dawn's situation throws onto publishers a huge challenge of, and my own experience as a publisher as well was exactly that. It's kind of, they've got multiple devices, multiple screen sizes, you know, that's one of the things. The fact that you call it a textbook, a digital textbook, so there's, you know, kind of, publishers are thinking books, all that kind of stuff. There's this sort of challenge all the way through, and I think one of the things that publishers are looking at, and this is true in nearly every publisher I've been in the last year, is we need to retool and rethink how we're handling everything that we do, in order that what we're not doing is, and this is a true story, a publisher I spoke to recently, to deliver the digital textbook on an iPad, because that was the choice.
Satan.
Sorry, that was the choice. No, but that was the choice.
Other devices are available.
No, they are. They will.
apparently.
But this is the thing is they made a choice because they have to make choices as publishers. They chose to deliver this digital textbook on an iPad. They took the InDesign files from the print textbook, got them redesigned by a print designer into landscape format, reproduce a PDF, and then that PDF became the basis of the iPad book. And then on top of that, they suddenly realised that there were things that said, please turn to page 56 and look at the picture. So they then had to build technology into that to be able to enable that to happen. And that is a current consequence of what's going on. And they're looking at it saying, this is unsustainable. It's the right thing to do for them, it's the only thing they could do. And where they need to get to is a way that they can do that differently, where they have their content coming out and somebody says, we need an iPad version, bang, there it is. We need an Android version, bang, there it is. Then we need a version that can go on a website, a version that can go on a mobile. And that's what needs to happen.
Let's see what the publisher, yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. I think it's about our workflows, making sure our content can be rendered in different formats. But I also think there's a cultural issue possibly within publishing in terms of we've always worked within a quite linear waterfall. We follow this process and then we publish. And actually, to me, the joy of digital is that you can publish quickly and no one's going to pulp your website. You can make changes and you can tell what I was a crap editor. Exactly, and you can hone it in line with the data. So I think that there is internally within the publishing industry quite a re-education and re-culture. Because at the moment, still, I imagine if you go and do an MBA in publishing, you're still being taught certain linear methods, and I think we need to be braver, a lot braver. And I would just say, I think that some of the non-traditional competitors that we have, the digital startups, are where we should learn from. And recently, when we were looking at our pricing, I went on a competitor website, won't name who, and I couldn't work out how much it was a year to subscribe to their digital. I thought, I've been working for years in this, I can't work it out. So teachers must be tearing their hair out. And I actually started looking at broadband adverts and how clear they were, with like, it's £5 a month plus £10. We need to be more transparent. And we need to take more notice of other digital businesses outside of publishing.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got about 3 minutes for questions from the floor because that was so fascinating. Okay, can I hear your question? Then I'll repeat it to the room.
John Pettigrew. Education technology has been going on for well over 20 years, and we've referred to it a little bit. But I'd really like to hear what's the benefit to the learner in technology. It's not about the device, it's not about the shiny. Why should we care about technology?
So why should we care about technology, given that educational technology has been around for 20 years? Okay. Right. As you spoke last, I'll give it to Dawn first. Okay.
We should care because it's there and it's not going away, and it adds so much. So it means that my school can Skype into a school in Denmark as opposed to reading a textbook about what life is like in Denmark. They can talk to Danish students. They can publish their work, not just for you to see as an adult or their grandparent, but they can publish it globally and have comments on it within minutes. So they're getting instant feedback on their work. They can create so much and can collaborate with others across the globe. We can't not use it just because it's been there for 20 years, and we probably haven't done enough with it in those 20 years. That shouldn't stop us. We should embrace it and use it more.
I think a good example for me is we're creating a lot of English literature resources, and you think about kids whose parents have never taken them to the theatre, who have never read to them at bedtime, and then they're faced with a print edition of Macbeth. That's just so unfair. Shakespeare was written to be performed. If you can put something in front of a student where they can watch a video, if that's their learning style, if they can hear something being performed, if they connect with it on that level, then absolutely we owe it to them to do it.
And I think, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not an educationist in the room, but education and learning is about helping learners make sense of the world, and the world is a technology place. So you've got to make sense of it. It's just, why not? You know, why wouldn't you?
I'd throw the question back to you and say, I wonder if they asked the same question when ink and quills, when they said, I mean, seriously, the point you made about ballpoint, I went to a secondary modern school in Rochdale, in Lancashire, and biros were banned because it would spoil my handwriting and everything like that. So, I understand the point that you're making. I think, to be honest with you, we've spent far too much money on technology for teaching and not enough money on technology for learning.
Brilliant. Thank you, and we've got time for one more question, or maybe two. Okay. As you're so close. Yeah.
So this is a bit of a tangent from what's been going on so far, but I think it's pretty relevant. And it relates to the experiment thing. So if the digital revolution as a whole is quite an experiment still in terms of its psychological and health effects on our brains and our bodies, and it's pretty unquantified still, but we do know some things. We know about eye strain, we know about short attention spans, we know about if you use an LED screen an hour before you go to bed, you're going to affect the way that melatonin is released into your body, which can affect things from your likelihood to get depression to your likelihood to develop cancer in later life. Like, this is serious stuff, and we don't know the full effects, and we won't for another 50 years or so. And in South Korea now, a lot of the nursery rhymes have been replaced by things like every 15 minutes take a break and look at something far away. Don't keep looking at the screen for hours on end. But as far as I'm aware, we're fundamentally not taking responsibility for the safety of our children in the technology we're encouraging them to use. Do you think that in the education system as a whole, and as people who are providing the next generation with all this technology, we should be taking more responsibility for teaching them to use it safely?
Who's going to take that one?
Well, absolutely, but I don't think that's the fault of technology. I think that's the fault of teachers and the policymakers. I was on the review of the National Curriculum for Computing and ICT that you were talking about, that your MOOC's gone for, and e-safety and the safety elements of it. I mean, all the other things you talk about, wireless and everything like that, I would suggest we didn't know the full effects of chalk on children and chalk dust and stuff when you stuff like that. Well, forgive me, but we didn't. When they introduced chalk, they didn't realise that might cause disease and so and affect quite a lot of teachers actually are off ill health with the effects of etc. Or the banda room. You remember the banda room and sniffing the banda? I certainly remember all that. So my point is, no, you're absolutely right. We don't know the effects of technology, but to suggest that we daren't do anything until everything's been proven safe. I think the internet safety question is a really, really interesting one. And I think schools are getting better and doing more of that. But to suggest that that's the fault of the technology, I'm not so sure.
Can I just nip in really quickly about the screen time?
I was going to say also, I think it's about not going from one extreme to another, where children are always on iPads, they're not socialising, they're not collaborating. I think technology should be used as a tool. You use it for a snippet, then you get your class to debate, and you don't rely on it wholly. So I think there should be, I hear what you're saying, but I think it should be intermittent, and actually 100% iPad or whatever would not be good.
the servant, not the master.
Yes, I was going to say I couldn't imagine anything worse than working in a classroom where all the children did was stare at screens all day. Because they, you know, where's the PE going to come in? Because obviously they'll all be unfit and I'll be the next initiative. But also it comes into home as well. And I know as education we get blamed for everything, which is fine. But you know, parents do have a responsibility, and they may leave my classroom and millions of classrooms around the country having been engaged in group work discussion, PE, playtimes, to go home and read to me, mummy, have a device. And it's the screen that has become the digital babysitter. So yes, I agree with your point about screen time, but I don't necessarily think it's all education's fault. I think society and parents have to play a part in it as well.
Carl, why don't you just wrap that up with the technology?
Oh, how unfair. I'm neither a parent or a teacher any longer. I am a technologist. I do look at the screen all day. I completely agree with you. I actually agree with the whole ethos here. It's not the thing itself that's the problem, it's the way we use it. And that's true about how you deliver really good learning as well. Having a piece of technology in the classroom used badly is going to be bad learning or bad teaching. And equally, having a piece of technology and using it well is going to be delivering good learning.
I agree. Just one slight counter there. My son has got Asperger's, and technology is the way that he copes with the world. He could not cope in a room full of people like this. He would die rather than coming here. If I asked him to communicate with you all through his Xbox Live, he would do that very easily and be very confident, and he's one of the most confident, and I've learned a lot from him. And so, yeah, I think it's very easy to fall into the trap saying, oh, you know, technology's bad, we shouldn't have them on. And I agree with all that. I've got grandkids and, you know, about limited time. Technology is also a great liberator for some pupils.
Thank you very much. I think that we've learned a few things. Millie and Bella will leave school in 2027, but won't need to burn their books. So where does that leave publishers and publishing technology providers? Technology is another tool, not a replacement for a teacher. Chocolate-covered broccoli is not the way forward. Are publishers equipped to be data curators, or have we got a long way to learn? Technology has the ability to transform learning, but are teachers equipped to use it? Heaven is attainable with a different mind or skill set. Publishers are firmly back in the classroom in terms of education in a digital age. But EdTech, as with all experiments, offers publishers great opportunity. And curricular, assessment, access to technology and budgets make educational publishing an exciting place to be. Publishers need to work with teachers and students. The end user is actually king these days. Education needs to grow up and take notice of the world we all live in. And crikey, the C word got an outing tonight. So all together, marriages can be made in heaven, but everyone knows a good marriage needs communication and working out. Thank you very much for coming.